Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 1100 likes on this one. Dropping a like on the video helps ensure more people see it, but it also just lets me know I'm doing a good job. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I do post content just like this all of the time. Also, I wanted to say sorry for the gap in uploads. I was recovering from a mouth surgery. Nothing major, everything is fine. Just, upload schedule's been a bit shaky because I have some health stuff going on, but nothing too serious, so don't worry about me. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, enjoy the 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads right after the ad break after this intro. There won't be any more after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. I went through a bad breakup. Couldn't get the guy to leave me alone. He was showing up at my work, home, even my mom's house. I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I started looking at states hours away from my hometown. Not a city, but not too small of a town either. I wanted to be able to walk the sidewalks and get to local shops. Moving to somewhere I knew no one. It would be nice to live in a neighborly town. I finally settled on a little town in the Pacific Northwest. I flew out to look for a job and a place to live. I spent the first few days walking around the main town, applying at a few shops. I quickly found a smaller book manufacturing company. I had an interview and fit what they were looking for. After that was settled, I set about finding where Cow, my little tuxedo cat, and I would call home. I started exploring a bit farther from the main town. There were some cute, quiet places, but they weren't calling to me. Then I found my new little neighborhood, Jerusalem Street. It was settled just a bit back from the main road. 3 rows of townhouses and a cul-de-sac. You could tell they had some age, but they were all well kept, and it was a lovely little street. Not the near identical wash of beige and gray have become so common. Most were light pastels. It looked like people liked living here. Lots of trees and gentle light dappling the ground underneath. Quiet. A couple of people out with their dogs or walking to town. A small area in the center with a bird feeder, a bench, and board that people could leave flyers or notes on. It looked like the people took pride in making a community. In the row at the back of the cul-de-sac was an empty lavender home with simple "for rent" sign out front. I spoke to the realtor in town, and everything was taken care of. Luckily, the owners left some basic furniture, so I didn't have to worry about anything too big. I flew back home, packed up my important stuff, and drove across the country with Cow buckled into the passenger seat. Of course, I had to stop and rest for a couple of nights on the way, let Cow out of his carrier, and stretch in a hotel room for the night. I timed our arrival for late morning so I would have a large part of the day to unpack and not disturb my new neighbors by getting there too early. Several people stopped by to welcome me as I was going back and forth from the car. An older woman with blue hair and eccentric dress introduced herself as Mrs. Jules. Said they had a welcoming committee. She was one that started it as she lived here most of her life. The neighborhood had a couple rules, but nothing too bad or anything like an HOA. They would be by around dinner time, when you really should be taking break anyway, she told me. She was nice. I told her I would be ready, and she said she hoped Cow would come out to see her. I smiled. I spent the next couple of hours getting everything out of the car so I could let Cow into the rest of the house to explore, and I could get a shower before the welcoming committee showed up. Around 5:30, there was a knock at my door, and I saw Miss Jules with a couple of other people. I welcomed them in. Miss Jules introduced me to Dave Hancock, the middle-aged neighbor directly beside me, and Kayla, a woman around my age who lived in the row of houses to my right. Miss Jules had brought some sandwiches and bags of assorted chips. We sat around my table, where I had managed to clear most of my stuff off. She commented that I had done well for one day of work. We sat around eating and making small talk. Kayla seemed shy, but told me she would be happy to show me around town, if I wanted to stay. I'm sure I'll take you up on that, but what do you mean if I want to stay? Kayla nervously looked at Miss Jules. She smiled warmly at me. We may as well get to the neighborhood rules. It's really not much to worry about. Can I have that paperwork, please? Dave opened a folder with some papers in it. There was a town map, a small pamphlet about the community center, and a printed list about our little streets. Miss Jules pushed them toward me. You can read those at your leisure, but I need to go over some things with you tonight. Okay, no problem. I stammered a little. The street cleaner comes once a month, in the afternoon on the first Tuesday of the month. You'll want any cars in the driveway, or to be out at that time. I'm sure you saw the board in the middle of the bench. You can find information about town events, people trying to rehome some things, or even some snacks for people to take. We all vote at the community center, when it's that time of year. This is all written down for you. You can come to any of us here if you have any questions or need anything. But now you know where the three of us live. Thank you. I'll be sure to leave some cookies out for everyone once I'm settled in. I didn't say more. It felt like she wasn't done going over things. There was a bit of tension in the air. Cow cautiously peeked around the corner to see what was going on. Hello, dear. How do you like your new home? She held her hand down to him. He slowly approached and sniffed her for a minute before rubbing against her hand. He must smell Emily. She's my tortie. Cute, I smiled. I'd like to meet her sometime. Absolutely. She paused before continuing. This is an old town. Not much has changed in a long time. It's had slow growth, and many natural areas have been maintained for centuries. The trees behind our streets are the edge of a state park. Wow, that's awesome. Kayla, I'd explore with you sometime if that's something you like, too. I'd love to, Kayla responded. I don't have a hiking buddy. Before I could say more, Miss Jules continued. I'll finish up so you can get some rest tonight. There's just one more rule we all follow here. Her face looked older than it had a minute ago, makeup crowding in the gentle creases of her face. She looked into my eyes. Don't look outside if you hear any noises at night. It's not all night, just between 1 and 3. Don't go out at that time. If you do get caught out at that time, there's Ashley Street just down the main road. You saw that, right? Park there for the night. Many of us have had to sit in our cars for a couple of hours over the years. This is a small enough town that the neighborhood knows it's just us, and won't get worried by a car there early in the morning. I didn't know what to think. My mom tried to come up with a logical reason. Do animals come in from the park? Something does, she said quietly. It's been at least as long as I have. As long as you don't look out. There's nothing to worry about. And don't worry about Cow, he'll be fine. I keep Emily inside just to be safe. It's not every night, but you're better off just not looking out at that time at all. I know this is a lot to take in, but please just listen to it. Any of our community would talk if you have any questions. We'll leave you be for the night. I'll check in soon. With that, she stood up from the table and the others followed. Kayla waved goodbye. Miss Jules' blue hair shone under the streetlights until she made it to her door. Dave stood around another moment as we watched them go. I know that all sounds pretty weird. The people that lived here before couldn't handle it and they left. My phone number is with the paperwork if you need anything. Or if you really need something overnight, just bang on the wall and I'll hear. I'll be over at 301. Good night. Thank you. Good night. I headed back inside, head pounding. I sat heavily on the couch and tried to absorb what I had just heard. Miss Jules looked serious, and she had been so nice. I felt bad doubting her. What was the harm in listening to her? I was normally sleeping at that time anyway, and she said Cal was safe. If she was, if they all were, being honest, I didn't want to find out. I would just stay inside and not go looking. Cal decided he was ready for bed and I followed. It had been a long day. I fell asleep hard and didn't wake up until sunlight was streaming through my window. Cow crying to be fed. I dragged myself out of bed as my thoughts drifted to the previous night. Maybe there was nothing. I hadn't woken up at all, and Cow was acting normally. He was fine anywhere as long as he was getting food. I got him fed and looked out my front window. Miss Jules was sitting on the bench, glancing back at my house. I got dressed and headed out to see her. "Oh good, how was your first night?" She stood up and took my hand. "Slept like a log. I didn't wake up until Cow demanded breakfast." She nodded. "I'm sorry I had to spring that on you last night, but it really has to be done right away." A few people started their mornings, smiling and nodding at us. They all looked a little relieved. So it really is true then. I'll be honest. I was half thinking I dreamt that. Unfortunately, yes. It's how I lost my husband and our son. I didn't want to scare you too much last night. I don't have to tell you the details. I stared blankly for a few seconds. "I'm so sorry." "It's okay, honey. It's been a long time. It's just a little bit easier than it used to be. I know they wouldn't want me to spend every day sad over them." "Can I ask what happened?" "What happens if you look?" I asked, wincing a little and hoping I didn't sound too insensitive. "Are you sure?" I thought another moment. "I would rather know than let the curiosity get to me." She sat back down. "We had heard the rules when we moved in together right out of school. My husband Charles and me. People had doubts about us, but we were meant to be from the day we met. When our son Joe was born, we decided we would lock him in his room for the night. We gave him the one without windows to be safe. Joe was getting a little older, and we hadn't locked his room at night anymore. I guess one day he got curious or didn't believe us. We heard a scream and ran to his room. Joe wasn't there. Before I could react, Charles pushed me in and locked the door. I heard him run out and then just silence. The neighbors saw what happened in the morning and rushed to the house. They found me locked inside. There was really nothing left of them. Chunks strewn across the lawn, everywhere. Blood soaked into the grass. They were buried together, just pieces. There was no way to tell who was who. That's all any of us know." "Oh my God," I whispered. I could feel the bile heating up my stomach, threatening to come out my throat. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what else to say." I'll never get the sight out of my mind, so I try hard to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. You really will be okay if you don't look. I should go tend to my Emily. I walked her home and gave her a hug. I went back inside and collapsed against the door. Cow came to see what was wrong and I scooped him up and cried. How was this real? I told myself again that this was the middle of the night. Just stay asleep, stay in bed. My house was perfect. My neighbors were lovely. Just don't look for any sounds at night. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, listlessly organizing my belongings. Cow screamed at me, and I just about jumped out of my skin. He just wanted dinner. Heart pounding and hands shaking. I got him taken care of to stop his yelling. I sat at the table and slid the bottle of whiskey over towards me. Just as I was going to take a swig out of the bottle, there was a knock at the door. I was tired, but got up to check. There was a swath of black hair. It was Kayla. "Hi, Miss Jules said she talked to you. I wanted to see how you were holding up." She smiled weakly at me. I stood to the side. "Do you want to come in? I was just going to have a drink." She stepped. "Thanks." Now that I had company, I grabbed 2 glasses and a couple cans of Coke. "I guess you would have heard her story too. How long have you lived here?" I inquired. Yeah, just a bit over a year. Have you seen anything? No, I've never dared look. No one else has looked since I've been here. The people who lived here before finally heard the noises and they left. She was pregnant. I think that's a big reason they didn't want to stay. So, you have heard things. Not a lot. I started sleeping with earbuds pretty quickly. I didn't need to hear more. I looked at her, hoping she would go on but didn't want to pressure her. She continued. The first time I just heard something walking around. It was quiet, but I could hear it rustling leaves as it went. I told myself it had just been an animal. We do live against the woods. A couple nights later, I heard it walking again. I had blinds drawn, but I still didn't even want to look in that direction. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. The movement stopped. I heard the faintest scratch, then knocking on the window, like someone tapping with a fingernail. I found some faint footprints in the morning. She paused to take a drink. They were bigger than I expected. They almost looked like a deer mixed with a human. Almost like there was a heel, but then they turned cloven. I moved my bed upstairs that day and started sleeping with the earbuds that night. It helps. I really recommend it. Thanks for the drink, she said, finishing it. I should go get settled for the night, and let me know when you've had time to unpack and we can do some hiking. During the day. Of course, and thanks for the tip. The next couple weeks I continued to put everything in their new places and started my new job. I was getting the hang of it. Things started to feel a little normal. Kayla and I had started hiking on Saturday or Sunday mornings, still well after the sun had risen. I hadn't heard anything at night. I never forgot to close the blinds, but I did start to forget about the noises. Nearly a month after I moved in, I heard walking through the neighborhood. I had seen deer a couple times, coming around dusk to drink at a couple bird baths around the streets. They were back. That's all it was. Still, I was glad I listened to Kayla's story and put my bedroom on the second floor. I about crapped myself when I heard the tapping on my window. I whisper called for Cow. He sat up from the end of the bed. My heart sank into my stomach. The tapping continued. I reached for my phone. It was after 2:45. It should be over soon. I didn't want to disturb him, but I felt like I had to talk to someone. My hands were shaking so badly I had to retype the message about 4 times. Hi Dave, sorry to bother you so early. I just can't sleep. I jumped as the tapping started to get more aggressive. My phone went off. It's no problem, don't worry. It'll be over soon, just a few minutes and then it's over for the night. It's never gotten in. Just don't look. Let me know if you need me to come over after or tomorrow. 2:55, so close. Okay, 5 minutes, I can do that. Thank you. I think I'll get shades. The blinds aren't good enough. Dave. It's a good idea. Tell Cow hi for me. I sat for another couple minutes and then the tapping stopped all at once. There was no rustling of something moving away, just silence. I pulled a slightly disgruntled Cow up closer to me. Anxiety through the roof. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Dave caught me in the morning. You did well. That was worse than it normally is. I could hear it from mine. Let me know if you need help with the blinds. He waved and was on his way before I could respond. He liked talking about these things even less than the others. Couldn't blame him. I stopped to get blinds after work and didn't forget to put my earbuds in again. Things continued as they had. Work, hike, play with Cow. I was making enough at my new job to be fine, but I had spent most of my savings to suddenly move. I stopped at the local bar and started taking some shifts. Friday nights, Saturdays, or Sundays. This was a smaller town, so even with a later shift, I still had about half an hour by the time I got home to get inside early. I was busy and tired, but it would be worth it. I would feel better having savings again, but I was just getting so tired. Finally, last Friday night, I was exhausted. That type of bone tired that sinks into your bones, so drained that a minor inconvenience could make you start crying. I worked every day for 3 weeks. I got home after my bar shift, 12:35. All I had to do was drag my tired butt in the house and pass out for the night. The next thing I remember is how uncomfortable I felt. My eyes snapped open. I fell asleep. How long had it been? I had only just got home, right? I was in my own driveway, with plenty of time to get in. I looked at my phone. 2:24. I heard something right by me. Before I could stop myself, I was looking over. All I saw were fingertips, just barely placed onto my driver's side window. The rest of the hand was obscured by the door. Then there was movement. What seemed to be branches started to move. They were turning towards my car, one gnarled point making contact with my window and scraping along it. I slammed my eyes shut. One hand desperately pulled my hood over my head, and the other covered my mouth, willing my breathing to get under control and not have a full-blown panic attack right now. I hadn't really seen anything, right? It didn't see me look. All I saw was fingertips. It could have been a normal person who got lost and ended up here. After all, the noises didn't come every night. Those weren't antlers. It was a trick of the darkness. Then, what made the shrill scraping coming from right outside? And those were fingertips, but they were too long and rough, worn and cracked and dirty. I curled in my seat trying not to scream, eyes squeezed shut. Antlers like bark, but hard enough to damage the metal burned into my mind. A slap. I bit into my lip hard enough to bleed but didn't scream. It sounded like a hand slamming into my door. Besides the other fingertips, I could hear heavy breathing. My chest ached. It felt like my heart would give out before anything else had a chance to happen. My stomach lurched as my car rocked, hard. Tears and snot soaked my hoodie. Another slam on the car and it rocked again. It felt like if it hit any harder, the glass would break. What were the rules here? Could it get in? It really seemed to be trying. A different slam echoed through my bones. The sick sound was like a head against glass, antlers scratching on the metal frame above. It slammed its head again. There was nothing I could do. Again. It wasn't in yet, and I figured my best bet was to stay down and keep my eyes shut. Again. The car rocked gentler this time, as the slamming stopped. I couldn't open my eyes. I didn't think it was long enough. It couldn't be 3 yet, but it was hard to tell. Minutes felt like hours. Time dripping by like cold molasses. How long had it stopped to stare in at me before its assault? I could hear it walking around, pacing around the car. It started to fade out. Then I heard hooves on pavement. Metal squealed and glass cracked. I screamed. Dead silence. I continued to lay curled on my side. Nothing more came. I heard Miss Jules calling me and running. I still didn't dare open my eyes. It took a few minutes of convincing, but I finally held my phone up and looked. 3:12. I started uncontrollably sobbing. Fear and relief racked my body, and I laid there shaking badly, stomach in knots. I was eventually able to unlock my door. Miss Jules ripped it open and held me in her arms. We cried together. That was nearly a month ago. I thought I'd leave that day, but still here. Where else would I go? I have kind, caring neighbors. My home is nice. I talk with Miss Jules. Dave checks in on me. I hike with Kayla. I hold Cow close. I did quit working the bar that day. I'll never go out at night again. I sleep with earbuds and a white noise machine. My bedroom windows are shuttered tight. From the inside, as soon as it starts to get dark. We spent most summers at my grandma's lake house. She'd been asking us to come more frequently since my grandpa died the previous year, but it was hard for my parents to get off work for more than a day or so at a time. The week we'd spent at my grandparents' was the only real vacation any of us got throughout the year. My favorite part of those summers was when my grandpa would take me out on the boat at night. I loved the way the water looked in the dark, and we always caught a crazy amount of catfish. The best part, though, was how quiet it was. I wasn't allowed to take out the boat on my own, as if I even could. One night, after spending the day walking around town, eating at local restaurants and shopping, my parents and grandma turned in early. I stayed up for another hour or so, watching the lake from the shore, listening to the waves crash against the sand, while wishing I could take the boat out. I noticed my grandpa's old shed that sat right beside the dock. He never let me go in there as a kid, saying it was dangerous. However, since I wasn't a kid anymore, I took it upon myself to find the shed key in one of the kitchen drawers and explore. I was hoping there was a paddle boat or a kayak. Hell, even an intertub would have gotten the job done. I just wanted to do the one thing I really liked about being at the lake. I opened the shed and instantly saw why my grandpa wanted me to stay out. There were sharp objects and heavy tools everywhere. Near the back, I saw a blue tarp covering a large object. I peeked underneath and smiled. I dragged the old, wooden rowboat I'd found out of the shed and onto the shore. I looked back at the cabin to make sure everyone was asleep, and saw the lights were all off, save for the porch light. I pushed the boat into the water and paddled. The cabin disappeared behind me as I moved further and further out. Soon everything else disappeared into the night sky, and all I heard were the sounds of small waves splashing against the boat and chirping insects. I lay back and allowed the gentle rocking of the boat to relax me while I stared at the bright stars scattered across the deep blue sky. For a moment, all the worries I had at the time disappeared. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, wishing I could stay there forever. Knock, knock. It was slight at first, so much so. I wondered if the waves pushed a small branch against the side of the boat. I ignored it for a moment and tried to refocus on the sounds of the waves, but the knocking came back louder. Knock, knock. I sat up and scanned the area for the source of the sound but saw nothing suspicious. I wondered if there was something lodged under the boat. Knock, knock. My eyes locked on the middle of the boat, where it felt like the sound was originating. The boat shook a little as I moved to the center. I knelt and pressed my ear against the bottom. Knock, knock. I fell back, almost tipping over the side, but I managed to regain footing. It was silent for a few minutes. I thought whatever it was must have been dislodged, or, God forbid, swam away. I shifted in my seat, realizing I'd been scared to move. Knock, 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 knock. I grabbed the paddle and dug it deep into the water as the knocking continued. I tried paddling for a few seconds before realizing I wasn't moving. The boat remained in place, as if it were stuck on something. I paddled as hard as I could, trying to shake it loose, but to no avail. The knocking stopped for a moment. Knock, knock. Something splashed a few feet from my boat. I didn't see it, but whatever it was big, at least the size of a large catfish. I moved to the opposite side of the boat and brought my knees to my chest. I lowered my head to my knees and started praying. Knock, knock. "He wants you to ask who's there," said a voice. My hands shook and my breathing increased. I didn't want to lift my head, but I knew I wouldn't be able to defend myself if I didn't. I took a deep breath before lifting my head and seeing a small figure on the opposite side of the boat. It was a little boy, around 7 or 8, with soaking wet clothes as if he'd swum to the boat and climbed in. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaking more than I'd expected. Knock, knock. "He wants you to ask who's there," the kid repeated. His face was emotionless. The knocks came again, increasing in speed and volume each time. Knock, 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 knock. Ask him who's there, I think the boy said, though I could barely hear him. I covered my ears, but it didn't stop the sound. It was as if the knocking was in my head. Knock, knock. Who's there? I cried. It stopped. I opened my eyes to see that the boy was gone. The lake stood still. I scanned the area but saw no signs of the boy or anyone. I breathed a sigh of relief, choosing to believe I'd imagined the whole thing. I put the paddle in the water and began paddling. The boat moved forward, allowing me to relax a bit. I was only a few yards from shore when the boat stopped, almost sending me flying off the front. I collapsed as the boat shook violently, as if in a raging storm. The water around bubbled like it was inside a boiling pot. I screamed as loud as I could. The boat stopped shaking as the water settled. I scanned the area for another moment when I noticed something pale moving underneath. It almost broke the surface before sinking back down. Something bumped the bottom of the boat, and I saw the pale silhouette move along the other side. It happened several more times before I noticed that there was more than one thing in the water. They all stopped in unison and floated just below the surface. I counted 7 of them. They were all different colors, but all resembled clumps of seaweed or some other thin, wispy vegetation. One by one, they broke the surface, and I realized what I was seeing was hair attached to some of the palest children I'd ever seen. Only their heads floated above the water, and all their eyes were fixated on me. I closed my eyes tightly, hoping this was all a bad dream, but when I reopened them, the children were all staring at me. My lips shook as tears fell from my eyes. "Don't cry, Mr. Bryson," said a little girl with dark hair, who swam closer to the boat. "I did everything you said." "Tell us another knock-knock joke, Mr. Bryson," said a boy. "That'll make you feel better." All the children screamed "yeah" in unison. I started. "Another knock-knock joke," they cried again. "I don't know any," I said, my voice shaking. "Yes, you do," said the dark-haired girl before moving closer to the boat until she bumped the side. Her little fingers curled over the edge as she pulled herself up and looked deeply into my eyes. I couldn't see until now, but her eyes were pale blue, like when a dog has cataracts. Purple veins snaked through her skin. She was wearing blue overalls and pink shoes, both caked in dirt and seaweed. "You told us all one before you tied us in a bag and threw us in the lake," she said. My mouth fell open, and my breathing stopped. Knock, knock. The kids all swam to the boat and climbed in. I tried backing into a corner, but they'd swarmed the boat in a matter of minutes. I felt their cold, damp hands cover my body as I tried to scream, but no sound left my mouth. When I awoke, the sun was centered in the sky. I covered my eyes before sitting up and wiping the sweat from my brow. I scanned the area for any sign of what had happened the night before, but found nothing. I took a moment to breathe and collect my thoughts before paddling back to shore. It had to have all been a dream, I thought as I dragged my grandpa's boat onto shore. As I placed the boat back where I found it, I noticed a small etching on the side. It was of my grandpa's name, Henry Bryson, with the year 1973 underneath. I figured that's when he and my great-grandpa built the boat. I started towards the entrance of the shed when I noticed something under one of the workbenches along the side. It was a large burlap sack. There were several of them. I looked closer and noticed something pink and white pressed against the wall. I pulled out a small shoe, buried in a layer of dust. I instantly dropped it. I covered my mouth as I knelt closer, realizing it was the same shoe the girl was wearing in the boat. I spent most of that week searching through the shed and my grandpa's old office while my parents and grandma were asleep. Grandpa was good at hiding things from everyone, even grandma. I managed to find a key in his desk that opened a safe buried in the back of the shed under some boxes of magazines. Inside I found pictures of children, most of whom I recognized from the boat. There were newspaper clippings and missing children posters, all of which I assumed he kept as trophies. There were even more disheartening things inside, like barrettes and bracelets. I wondered for a while if it was worth telling the police, as there was likely nothing left of the bodies, based on the newspaper clippings. Their bodies would have been underwater for decades. I couldn't get their faces out of my head. I saw them, soaking wet and pale, whenever I tried to sleep. My parents noticed the change in me, though I refused to acknowledge it. After a while, I swore I saw the children everywhere I went. I couldn't take it. They dredged the lake a few weeks later. The only things that remained were tiny skeletons of some of them. Some of those were identified from dental records. One of them was the little girl with the pink shoes. I saw her family on the news. They talked about what a beautiful soul she was and how much of a monster my grandpa was. I can't say I disagreed. My grandma never invited us back to the lake. I don't know how she felt about Grandpa after that, but I knew she hated the attention it had brought. I miss those summers at the lake, but I know it wouldn't be the same knowing what my grandpa did to so many kids. And I'm so glad he never told me a knock-knock joke. The Aurora Borealis has been waving over these Kansan skies the past few nights. It's absolutely breathtaking and something I never thought I'd get the chance to behold. I didn't think it'd be one of the last things I saw, though. I don't recommend you look, if it's over you. See, an hour ago, I was watching some horror drama series, smoking a joint, happy as can be. My black lab Shadow started pawing at the basement door, which is my signal that he needs to relieve himself. My joint was done anyway, so I put it out, paused my stream, and tossed my phone to the couch. I've heard about the northern lights making their way to our skies, seen pictures from my friends, but hadn't gotten the chance to see it with my own eyes. When I walk out onto the back patio, it's nearly pitch black. Nothing new, considering all my neighbors aside from the one directly next door have kids and go to bed rather early. Everyone's got homemade privacy fences via some trees and very overgrown weeds, which lends a hand in blocking any light. Shadow darted off into some corner of the yard as he always does. The air was chilly, so I'd pulled my sweater just a little closer around me, and that's when I saw it. The pink lights dancing in the distance. They weren't directly over my head, but if I stood in one particular spot, I could see it. At first, I almost cried. It was beautiful. It waved and danced and made me grateful for being alive, being on this planet, and getting to experience things like that. I stared at the sky for what felt like forever, until the grass rustling and a bark grabbed my attention. I shouted my dog's name as I walked back towards the back door to my home, ready to slide it open. I hear Shadow's footsteps start barreling towards me. I slid the door open for him, but tried to peer through the leaves of our red bud tree for one final glimpse of the rare phenomena before heading inside. Shadow's collar jingled just as he ran past me into the house. Even though I'd heard his footsteps, he seemed to almost appear out of nowhere from the shadows and into that moment of light. He was running so fast. He was a blur of black as he darted past me inside and up the stairs. I felt my heart skip a beat, but chalked it up to anxiety from smoking. I locked the door and closed the blinds before heading back to continue couch rotting, but stopped in my tracks when I got to the top of the stairs. Shadow was standing in the middle of the living room staring at me. I laughed at myself and told him to stop being creepy, figuring we could both go for a little treat. I walked past him and into the kitchen, an ice cream pop for myself, and a pig ear for Shadow. Normally the crinkle of the bag is enough to make him come running. I'd all but put it back, and he still hadn't come to claim his prize. I call his name again, then peer out into the living room. The ice cream in my hand falls to the floor as a scream rips from my throat. Shadow looked like Shadow, but was now actively morphing into some stretched and skewed version of him. I heard snapping as he grew unfathomably, quite quickly I'll add, before his neck became too long to hold up on its own. His head fell to the wooden floor with a thud. My dog, or what was my dog, smiled, then with its newly elongated limbs, started pushing its still bursting body towards me with too fast of a pace. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. The stairs to my attic area, where my bedroom is, are luckily accessed through the kitchen. I sprinted up them, straight to my room and slammed the door shut, just as two large of paws thud up the stairs after me. I've always loved that my space has hidden pocket doors, but now I'm not so keen. Just as I turned the tiny lock on my door, the door started shaking on its track as the exploded version of my dog started banging on it. I thought myself brilliant for choosing my bedroom over the office or the closet, since this room is the only one of the three with a window. The first thing I did was race over to my window. It opens right to the roof of my attached garage, which would make for a relatively easy escape. I was halfway there, feeling the rough shingles under my bare feet before I looked up and noticed my next door neighbor, Hunter, staring out of his window and directly into mine. I yelled his name, telling him I needed help, but he just stood there staring at me. He smiled quickly, raising his hands up for a moment, then his smile faded as his hands moved down slowly. He did it again, then again, and by the third time I was already terrified. He made it worse when the fourth time, he kept his hands raised and the grin plastered on his face. He stared at me, then wiggled his fingers. Had the lights in his room not been on, it had been impossible to read his lips. They were on, though, and as I read the words, "Gotcha," he, too, started sporadically snapping and stretching into something inhuman. I scurried over to the edge of my roof, and just before I leaped over the edge, a shadowy figure in the middle of the road shifted, scraping the gravel beneath it. I froze and watched it for a moment. When it didn't start exploding, I felt relief, which went away as fast as it came when the figure started running towards me. I screamed again and then looked back into my bedroom. The door was holding true, but banging against its track like nobody's business. Another glance to Hunter, still in his window peering over at me, showed that he no longer resembled anything close to human. He reminded me of those snake fireworks that you light, and they just grow and grow until they turn to ash and fizzle out. All the color had removed itself from his skin. His eyes were gaunt, and he just kept stretching. I thought, screw this, and crawled back into my bedroom. That's when the banging on my door stopped, and the singing started. I'm verily merrily, but here quite contrarily. Why don't you let me in? Don't be afraid, I'll be quick. Let you live. Promise, I just want your skin. Why don't you let me in? I scrambled for my phone for almost a full minute before I realized I left it on the couch. Thankfully, my laptop still has a little bit of juice in it. Crappy thing is, none of my messages will go through. I can't send chats, emails, nothing. I've run out of options, so I'm going to try posting this as a last-ditch effort. I'm not sure what to do. Has anybody else experienced this crap? What do I do? The thing that took over my dog won't stop singing the same thing over and over, though the lyrics have changed in the last few seconds. Why don't you let me in? Let me in, let me in. The weed I smoked was near the end of my stash, and I don't have near an experience like this any other time I've smoked it, so it feels safe to rule out. If I don't make it through the night, and it comes out that I've been found as a curled up, ashen turd, please heed this warning. Whatever is making these Midwestern night skies pink and red, isn't the Northern Lights. I think it's something evil. If you do get a glimpse, you might just want to let them in. Because right now, that's the only thought running through my head. That and a jingle that's becoming incessant enough I'm starting to hum it. Quite contrarily, I'm hearing very merrily. I think I'll let them in. I won't be afraid, they'll be quick. Let me live. They just want my skin. I think I'll let them in. I'm honestly not quite sure why I'm writing this, or who I'm even writing this to. Maybe just to warn people. About what, I don't even know. Maybe to reach out to anyone with similar experiences. I grew up in a tiny town. I'm not even sure it could be called a town really. More of a village or a hamlet. The kind of place stuck in the 50s, where everybody knew each other and there were more churches than houses. It sounds charming, I guess. But as anyone who lives somewhere like what I've described, you know it's boring at best, and torturous at worst. There was only one school for every kid born here from the time they grew out of diapers to the time they graduated, and if they were lucky, left this dump of a place. There were only ever maybe 30 kids in the school at most, and even to this close-knit community, I was an outcast. Not that I minded really. I didn't like these kids either. I only really had one real friend. My next door neighbor, Molly. Our parents were close too, and we often had supper together, which I guess is why we grew so close. But that's not why you're reading this. I don't think you want to know about a lonely and scrawny little boy with no friends in a boring village. My home wasn't boring really. We had some strange rituals. You could chalk some of it up to just Bible Belt activities. You'd essentially be outlawed if you skipped church on Sunday. Wives were to stay home and cook while husbands were to go out and work in the nearby mine. If you didn't have at least 3 of the Bibles our church had hand-scribed, you weren't allowed to go to the church. The like. But we also had something else that I found strange. The festival happened once a year. If you're wondering what the festival was, so were all of us. Nobody knew what it was or why we did it. Hell, nobody even knew what happened if we didn't do it. One of our many pastors, Father Sinclair, usually ran the whole thing. From the outside, it could look like a normal church festival. During the day, that's sort of what it was. A group prayer followed by the dads grilling sausages or burgers. The children running around and throwing a ball around as the moms brought out cookies and chatted. Maybe some music if Father Sinclair had raised enough money. But by night, things changed. Everybody was to go inside, except Father Sinclair and some volunteers from the school. After they had ensured all residents truly were inside, they completed it. Curious kids who wanted to know what was happening may have pressed their ears to the bedroom windows to hear nothing but silence. Well, until 3:33 in the morning. Every year without fail, at 3:33, a loud, screeching-like sound could be heard, followed by otherworldly chanting, followed by silence again. I know that because I was one of those curious kids. Molly and I both were. The story I'm telling took place during our 12th festival. By this time, it had been a few years of Molly and I theorizing what the festival was for. It was maybe a week or so until our next festival, and this year we were dead set on discovering what it was. Maybe we could sneak out during the night portion of the festival. Well, that wasn't for another week. We decided to go through Father Sinclair's office to try and discover dirt on him. After the usual Sunday service, Molly and I took advantage of everyone being distracted by a bake sale to sneak into the upper level of the church. I'm not sure if we were doing this because we were genuinely curious, or if we just liked the thrill of doing something naughty, but either way, I remember my heart beating in my throat as we crept into Father's office. "Unlocked," Molly whispered as we stifled giggles. You know, if he's so protective of his office, he really should do a better job keeping people out. We both held our breaths as we slowly opened the door, being careful of any creaks. It was kind of underwhelming. Maybe we were expecting something like Satan's lair, complete with tapestries of demons and torture chambers, but it looked just like a normal office. I opened all the drawers of his desk as Molly went through the filing cabinet. Nothing. We were about to give up when I tripped on the carpet. Part of it flipped up when we saw it. There in the middle of the floor was a weird symbol. It kind of looked like a star. Neither of us recognized it. Okay, maybe it's just a drawing. Maybe he's secretly an artist, Molly said, trying to make me, who probably looked like I had seen a ghost, laugh. I, still the little religious boy as I'd been raised, clutched a Bible I found on Father Sinclair's desk. Mindlessly, I began shifting through the pages. Molly, I said. These pages are weird. She took the Bible from my hands, furrowing her brow. I don't recognize any of these verses. I've read the Bible like 1,000,000 times. This isn't right. Hello, kids, we heard and both jumped back. It was Father Sinclair. If it isn't little Molly McKee and Robert Crane, such curious little ones. Well, not so little anymore. You must be 12 years old by now, is that right? He said as he paced towards us menacingly. Yes, Father. Molly said as I shook like a leaf, unable to even say anything. We're sorry we snuck into your office. Nonsense. Nothing wrong with a bit of curiosity, Father said, stomping on the symbol we had recently discovered. He looked at us with a sharp, knowing eye. I could use some curious kids such as yourselves at next week's festival. How's about it, kids? Would you like to be my volunteers? I started to shake my head no, but he placed a cold hand on my shoulder, a gesture I wasn't familiar with. He did it to everyone in town as a sort of comfort, but it felt much different now. He pressed it hard into my skin, hard enough to leave a bruise. Robert, you and I both know you haven't much of a choice here, he said as he winked. It's nothing to worry about, really. He pushed us out of his office. Now run on home. Hug your mothers. Molly and I sat in her room that night, not saying a word. We were too shaken up. Silently, she pulled one of her family's 5 Bibles, the ones gifted to us by Father Sinclair. Then she reached into the book bag she had brought to church that day. She pulled out the Bible we found in the office. Molly, you took that? He's gonna kill us, I warned. I think he was going to do that anyways, she said dryly as she opened them side by side. I watched as she seemingly got more and more puzzled. It makes no sense, Rob, she said as she flipped through both books. These books say the complete opposite of each other. I don't know which one to believe. There, that verse isn't our Bible. What's it say? I pointed at one, which Molly began reading aloud. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy the devil prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Every year without fail, at 3:33 a loud, screeching like sound could be heard. The volunteers from the school. Molly? I said tentatively. What happens to the volunteers every year? Well, usually they move away. They just go to school or something, she said, but she didn't sound convinced. Molly? I said tentatively again. Have we been praying to the wrong god? Eventually the festival came and Molly and I, like we should have been, were properly terrified that whole week. When the day came, and then the night, we tried to sneak away. But there was no getting past Father Sinclair. You two, brave volunteers, will stay here, he said, grabbing us tightly by our arms. We sat under the moonlight in a deafening silence. You don't need to lie to us anymore, Sinclair, Molly said, breaking the silence. We know what you're doing. Father Sinclair turned around sharply. He struck us both across the face as I cried out in pain. He smirked. Do you know why you live such fortunate lives? Why we all live such fortunate lives? I do this for us, really. For all of us. And soon you'll have done this for all of us too. You should really be proud. He said as he drew that weird star on the ground with a stick. We watched as he lit candles and said weird words. Suddenly a loud screech caused Molly and I to duck and cover our ears. I guess it was 3:33. When I helped Molly up, I saw it. It towered over us, challenging the height of the trees. A tall, dark figure, horns and all. He looked down at us. Father Sinclair bowed down. Your subjects, sir. He pushed us towards him as we tried to run away. He bent down. You have broken the rules, Sinclair. I thought I had made things very clear. In a moment, Father Sinclair had dropped his normal demeanor as I saw fear fill his eyes. What rule? I haven't broken a rule at all. Your subjects, as promised. My conditions, he boomed. That for the life you live, the goods I grant you, you mustn't ever harm a soul again. The souls harmed were to be saved for me. He touched me with his large claw that was hot to the touch. Is this a bruise I see? He turned his attention to Molly, and the red mark on her face. Unbelievable. But sir, Father Sinclair pleaded, getting on his knees. What about the good of my village? All these people praying just for you, because of me. Can we not make another deal? He pondered for a bit. Very well. I may allow another year of prosper to this village, but I will need another sacrifice. Father Sinclair pushed Molly and I forward yet again. He shook his head. Not them. You are the one I'm after. And with that, we watched as he grabbed Father Sinclair with a massive claw and threw him like a doll to the ground as he was consumed by the flames below him. I can still hear his screams to this day. Molly and I stood in shock until the massive being turned his attention to us. And you too, he said, bending down to our level. Go, leave these grounds and do not return. You must get out of here. Confused but not wanting to disobey this thing, we both began to leave. I turned back. See you soon? He smirked. Indeed. I stepped off the tour bus and smelled the sea. The laughter of other passengers mixed with the cool breeze as I looked at the cruise ship towering over the dock. The excursion of the historic center had been perfect. Local food, souvenirs, and dozens of photos, mostly of street cats. I was looking forward to the dinner on board, during which the ship was going to leave the port and begin a 7-day journey across the Atlantic towards the Caribbean. After I changed clothes and freshened up in my cabin, I headed to the main dining room. An announcement was made that the departure is delayed by about 10 minutes due to a pair of passengers being late. Oh well, the second time during the cruise that this has happened. I walked past slightly annoyed-looking passengers and reached the dining room. It was a beautiful restaurant, stretching across the width of the ship and towering 3 decks high. It was decorated with white panels, completed with blue decorations on the tables and the chandeliers. Most passengers were already seated, while I was led to a small table for 2 in the back half of the hall. I couldn't see out of any windows, but I wasn't bothered by it because the food was very good. The other people were talking, laughing, and enjoying their vacation. I finished the main course and was looking forward to my dessert when I noticed a couple sitting next to a window. The window was slightly dirty and had round corners, but what caught my attention was that they were crying. They didn't look particularly sad, but there were tears streaming down their face. Without talking, they stood up simultaneously and left. Soon after, I heard shouting and loud noises outside the dining hall, but I didn't think much of it and finished my dessert. I did not see the couple afterwards, and headed for a small library lounge on one of the lower decks. On my way, I saw multiple crew members speaking quietly to each other while looking slightly nervous. After I sat down with my book, a crime novel from the 30s, I felt a slight sense of dread. I was sure it came from the overall feeling of unease coming from nearby crew members. After I noticed two of them talking, I started walking slowly in their general direction, pretending to look at the bookshelves. They were brought to the cooling room on deck 3, I heard one of them say, followed by, "I heard it was a mess. I am glad we were not there." Then they walked away, leaving me wondering what they were talking about. I wasn't in the mood for my book anymore, and headed upwards towards the open decks to catch some fresh air. I walked up the stairs, deck by deck, thinking about the two crew members. What kind of mess were they talking about? Why the cooling room? Just as I reached the top of the stairs, heading for the door leading to the upper deck, a young woman opened the door and came back inside. Or should I say, she just walked straight through the door without even lifting her hand. Her body just walked against the doors, and pushed them open while walking slowly forward, like an unstoppable object. She looked straight ahead, not noticing anyone around her, but I immediately saw the tears, not small ones, but a stream of tears running down her face. She did not even try to brush them away, just kept walking towards the stairs while looking forward. She slowly walked past me. I thought she was going back to her cabin, but she suddenly stopped in the middle of the stairway. She slowly turned around with a smile. Not a happy smile, but one you would give a crying child. A smile filled with compassion and pity. Suddenly she bowed down and slammed her head forwards with an enormous force against the edge of a stair. Blood covered the stairs, and the sound of her skull splitting open echoed from the steel walls of the stairwell. I ran. I should have alerted a crew member or tried to administer first aid, but the feeling of unease was so big that I immediately ran outside on the open deck. But what I saw there made me stop in an instant. About 5 passengers were outside. 10 more were lying on the ground covered in blood. The 5 passengers all smiled with tears running down their face. One of them had a thin, broken steel rod in his hands, but before I could see what he had planned to do with it, I screamed and ran back inside, past the woman on the floor and straight into my cabin. I slammed the door shut and sat down, burying my face in my hands and sobbing. I examined the cabin. Everything was clean and tidy. I wish I had a balcony or even a window, but I just stared against the wall. The slow movement of the ship was soothing, and I calmed down a bit. I sat on the ground for what felt like hours, until I gathered the courage to peek outside the cabin again. I opened the door and looked down the hallway. It was quiet. The handrail on the side of the hallway had red stains on one spot, which I quickly looked away from. I moved towards the lifeboat deck to look for a crew member. I headed up one deck, and just before the door leading to the lifeboats, I stopped. Letters written in dried blood covered the glass window of the door. "Don't look down," was all it said. I hesitated and refrained from pushing the door open. I turned and saw a woman looking at me from a few meters away. I immediately looked at her eyes, and thankfully, there were no tears, just a frightened look. I immediately felt that her gaze also went straight to my eyes to check for tears. "Did you look?" she yelled at me. I told her that I hadn't. After coming closer, I asked her if she knew what happened. "Passengers all across the ship have started to cry and hurt themselves. I don't know what comes over them. I first noticed when I was chatting with a guy in the main atrium, when he suddenly looked out of the window and started crying almost like someone told him his family died. But he did not look like he was sad. He looked like he is sad for someone else, overwhelmed by compassion. He He went and... She started sobbing, but she did not have to continue. We both knew what happened to everyone that looked. After she introduced herself as Sarah, we decided to move further to the front of the ship in search of crew members who might be able to contact emergency services. It was already strange that no one showed up. We were still close enough to shore for helicopters or the Coast Guard to reach us. We tried to use our smartphones, but there was no signal. The ship's Wi-Fi, advertised by the cruise company for being one of the fastest on the sea, had vanished. As we were moving forward, passengers with tears streaming down their faces walked inside from the lifeboat deck, but we never looked at them for long. Just before reaching the front of the ship, we saw a panicked crew member walking towards the lifeboats. He saw us and gestured us to come, even though the crying passengers were never paying attention to us. He was whispering. They looked. All of the officers on the bridge, they looked. The feeling of unease intensified. If there is no one on the bridge anymore, we cannot contact the outside or turn around. The crew member who introduced himself as Jim told us he is going to try and lower a lifeboat to escape while wearing a blindfold. With a nod of approval, we prepared to go out on the lifeboat deck, tying a ripped sleeve, storing our heads. Jim went first and pushed the door open. Cold air hit our faces like 1,000 needles. We slowly moved forward and then to the left. After about 7 meters, we reached a lifeboat crane. Jim pulled a lever, and the lifeboat began to ascend from the top of our heads towards the deck level so that passengers could enter. Just before it reached the floor, a part of the crane arm descending from the ceiling hit my head and ripped my blindfold from my eyes. The impact threw me to the ground and left me disoriented. I heard the others scream something to me, but I felt dizzy and only heard their voices as a faint rambling. I opened my eyes. I saw the waves below me, a beautiful sight, with the moonlight reflecting in the waves. First I saw nothing, then I noticed motion beneath the waves. I thought the motion came from sharks or dolphins, judging by the size, but after my eyes adjusted to the dark, I realized human bodies moving with the ship. One of the bodies reached its hand towards the hull and started climbing, somehow having a grip on the perfectly flat surface of the ship. The body seemed long drawn, but climbed upwards with a wide smiling mouth. Poor thing, I thought. It must be so cold and hungry. I felt pity for it, as if I found a dying animal on the road. Tears started streaming down my face. I could feel that it was so hungry, starved for years. If only I could give it something to eat. The tears kept coming. It reached the top and smiled at me. If only I had food on me. Maybe I could give it something of mine. It needs my body more than me. It looks so weak and desperate for food. Smiling so friendly. The sharp edge of the railing caught my attention. If only I could give it something to eat. I was standing in front of the railing, slowly raising my head. I wanted to crack my head open to give the creature food. It filled me with joy knowing that it would finally be able to eat something. Just as my neck muscles began to slam down, a hand tried to grab the back of my shirt. It did not bother me. I was concentrated on the railing. Suddenly the hand grabbed me and violently pulled me back. It was Sarah pulling me into the lifeboat. The smile on the creature vanished, and it opened its mouth wide to reveal many rows of sharp teeth. Its gaze was suddenly filled with unfathomable anger. It leapt forward, but the lifeboat already lowered. It felt like an eternity to reach the waterline, but as soon as we touched down, I stopped crying, confused and scared. We sailed towards the coast while the ship slowly disappeared behind the horizon. I think this has to be my favorite day of the year. The first cold front coming through after an oppressively hot summer. Along the coast is a blessed change. A far cry from the 100% humidity we cope with every day. The air has a crisp quality and makes me want to spend the entire day outside. An evening set in, getting darker earlier and earlier as the year goes forward. I clicked on the lamp beside the couch, wrapped a light blanket around my legs, and settled down to read the latest novel by my favorite author. The wind was whipping hard outside. I could clearly hear it, but somehow it gave me comfort. I was barely past the latest chapter when the light from the lamp flickered. The way the wind was blowing, it came as no surprise that we may lose power, or at the very least have it blink in and out. So I wasn't fazed. I got up and lit candles around the house, just in case. When I sat back down with my book, I stared at the page. I couldn't remember where I left off. I flipped back a couple of pages and nothing seemed familiar to me. It was as though I was reading the words for the first time. I tried to think of the last thing I could remember from the story and flipped back to find it. It was several chapters back. I shrugged it off. I attributed it to a sort of dissociative state. Everyone has those from time to time, like when you're driving home after a long day and zoning out, then suddenly realizing you're nearly home. It has to be something along those lines. No harm, no foul. Just pick up from where I left off. I made it about 5 pages before the lights flickered again, so I got up to light the candles, just in case I lose power. But these are candles lit. I don't remember doing that. I walked through all of the rooms and each one had a lit candle. I could tell by the amount of wax melted that they weren't lit long ago. You would think I would remember lighting them. As I crossed into the kitchen, I saw the lamp in the living room flicker. I looked around the kitchen and couldn't remember what I came in here for. Maybe a cup of tea on a cold, blustery night. I filled the kettle and set it on the burner, then headed back to the couch while I waited to hear it whistle. I decided to text my best friend Stacy and tell her about my strange night. I told her about not remembering the book, not remembering lighting the candles, and that I still don't know why I went to the kitchen, but a cup of tea sounded nice. She got back to me, asking if I had been in any sort of accident, if I had taken a tumble and hurt my head or anything that could account for the memory loss. I told her I hadn't, that it had been an uneventful day at home, and nothing of note happened. She told me to let her know if anything else happened, that she was worried about me, and I said I would. As the kettle whistled, I set down my phone and went to make a cup of tea. I curled up back on the couch while my tea steeped on the end table next to the lamp. After about 2 minutes, I reached for my tea and the lamp flickered. I picked up my cup and blew on it as my phone chimed that I'd gotten a message. It said it was from someone named Stacy. I don't know anyone by that name. I opened the message and read it. It said she was just checking on me. This makes no sense. I scrolled up. There were messages back and forth between us, and it went on and on and on. I made my way back to where she says she is checking on me, and read what was written right above it. It said that I have been having trouble remembering things, but that I have no idea what could have caused it. This is really starting to freak me out. Then, the lamp flickered. It started with a bar of chocolate. You didn't eat it? Sarah asked when I told her about it. No, I opened the parcel because it had my name on it, but it clearly isn't actually meant for me. Sarah sighed. If Amazon haven't emailed you saying you need to return it, then I don't get what the big deal is. It isn't from Amazon. The address is handwritten, so I'm not eating it. It'd be weird. The phone went silent for a moment. Okay, that does sound weird. You don't recognize the handwriting? Nope. Secret admirer? Sarah suggested with a hint of mischief in her voice. I groaned. I don't want an admirer. I don't even want the chocolate. Not when it's been sent by some mysterious stranger. Send it to me. I'll take it. No. That should have been the end of it, but I wouldn't be writing this if it was. When I received the second delivery, I recognized the handwriting instantly. Inside there was a voucher for 2 games of bowling. There was no note. Whilst the chocolate had been a flavor that I enjoyed, the bowling voucher was less personal, at least. I hadn't been bowling since I was a child, so if... Wait. For the first time I registered which alley this voucher was for. It offered me 2 free games at my local alley, which wasn't even part of a chain. Whoever had sent this to me either knew that I lived close to the bowling alley this voucher was from, or lived locally himself. Maybe even both. If this is a prank, I don't like it, I said when I called Sarah. I wouldn't, Sarah insisted. This is actually sort of creepy. Did you talk about chocolate and bowling at work maybe? No. Right. Nobody at work even knows my address anyway. We talk on social media sometimes, but they've never come to visit or anything. There was a pause and I could hear tapping from the speaker of my phone, the gentle yet repetitive sound of Sarah poking her phone's screen. Are you seriously scrolling on your phone whilst we're having this conversation? I didn't like the sound of my voice as it left me, a shrill, demanding cry. Still, I felt my concerns were serious enough that Sarah should be paying more attention than casually multitasking. It's not like that, she said quietly. I was seeing if I could find your address. But you know my address. Yes, but if I didn't, I think I might still be able to work it out from some of your posts. You took a photo of the skyline and said it was from your window. You have a post you tagged with support your local library, things like that. I don't think / could work out how to find you from this, but only because I don't know what I'm doing. I've read stories about people who've tracked exes down from photos, where there's a letterhead with their address on, that they hadn't realized was there, and there are people online playing games where they can track a location from a photo of a park bench or whatever. This could be somebody from your work. I had to think of any of my coworkers who might like me or dislike me enough to do this. In fact, Sarah continued, it could be anyone at all. You still have a Facebook page, and your name's pretty unique. Is it even private? I don't know how to tell. It isn't. It will be. I'm sure it's nothing, she said. Sarah has never been a good liar, and the slight waver in her voice betrayed the fact that she was now almost as worried as I was. I ended the call and threw the voucher away. If I'd been unsure whether or not the gifts I'd been receiving were well-meaning or creepy, the next parcel more than made up for it. It was larger and heavier than anything that I'd received so far, and really I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. The cardboard box held a small, cool box inside like you might use if you wanted to bring some pasta salad with you on a summer's hike. I pulled off the lid with increasing dread and found myself looking at long, sandy blonde hair. I wasn't scared at first. The gentle curls sat there waiting for a reaction, and I felt nothing at all. In a trance-like state, I lifted the hair out of the box, as if getting a closer look would make all of the pieces fall into place, and the hair came up as one connected mass. It was then that I noticed the pieces of scalp holding the hair together, and I screamed so loud and so long that my next-door neighbor forced the door open to reach me. "Are you hurt?" he asked in an authoritative yell. I couldn't answer, and only succeeded in bringing my screams down to a gibbering, sobbing mess of chaos. I'd thrown the hair away from me when I'd noticed the skin attached to it, and I pointed at it. He picked it up just as I had, and recoiled when he realized what he was holding. "What the?" he muttered. The police were called. I think they were reasonably thorough, but I don't know what steps they're meant to take when someone gets a scalp delivered to their home. They took fingerprints and DNA from both me and the neighbor who'd stormed in to help me. He didn't look pleased with the interaction, but he complied. I was advised to stay somewhere else if possible, and to get cameras. I broke the lock on your door when I came in, my neighbor admitted. Do you want me to install a new one? I shook my head. I'd never had to attach a lock to a door before, and my neighbor had given me no reason to distrust him, but whoever was sending these parcels was dangerous, and right now, anyone could be a suspect. I'm sorry, I thought you were in trouble, he said. He did ask if I wanted him to stay with me, but I'd feel no safer with this stranger, whose name was either Mick or Mike, and occasionally played death metal loud enough that I could hear it through the walls than I would alone. He left and closed the useless door behind him. Staying where I was tonight seemed unwise. Ideally, I'd stay with a friend, but Sarah was my closest friend, and she lived a 2-hour flight from where I was. Even at that point, I didn't want to reach out to my parents. I didn't want to upset them, partly for their sake, but partly for my own. I'd been to years of therapy, but neither of them had really dealt with what had happened when I was younger, and instead developed an excessive fear that something truly terrible could befall on any of us at any moment. They fed into each other's paranoia, and I was terrified that if I told them what was going on, then they'd suck me in, and I'd finally become so fragile and broken that I couldn't be fixed. I bought cameras and locks, and spent the evening making my home as safe as it could be. I didn't sleep that night, and kept a kitchen knife near me at all times. The next parcel was small. I wasn't even supposed to open it, and if it had arrived sooner then I wouldn't have. But I'd been trying to get the police to tell me anything about the investigation into the scalp I'd received, and they weren't telling me anything. Some crazy part of me thought that this parcel could have a clue, and I'd be able to solve the mystery myself. There was nothing particularly disturbing in this box but a child's toy. Specifically, it was a Polly Pocket set. Not the newer ones that I think are still made today, but a mermaid-themed set that was new when I was a kid. This wasn't the brilliant lead I'd hoped for, but it wasn't nothing either. An hour of internet searches told me that this set hadn't been in production for a long time, and barely anybody was selling this particular set online. Only one of the sellers wasn't overseas, and so I decided to start there, sending a long and emotional email explaining that if they recently sold a Polly Pocket mermaid sleepover set, then I desperately needed details of who they sold it to. I attached photos of the scuff marks near the clasp and the chipped paint on Polly's dress, in the hope that it would verify that I was telling the truth. 2 days later, I'd received no word from the toy seller, but my dad called. Grandma had been in some sort of accident, and as she didn't live near to me and my parents, they were both traveling out to help look after her. I knew that my mystery stalker was behind that too somehow, but I couldn't prove it, so I said nothing. Finally, there was something close to good news. I received an email from the online toy seller telling me that she had sold the set in the pictures recently. I didn't recognize the name that she gave me, but she also gave me his email and his address. I had his actual address. A sane person would have called the police, but they still hadn't said a thing about the scalp, and this guy was messing with my family. A quick Google told me that the address was only a 10-minute drive away, and I grabbed the kitchen knife that I had taken to sleeping next to, and headed to the place where my stalker apparently lived. Once I arrived at his door, I realized that I wasn't sure what to do next. I knocked and regretted it immediately. When nobody responded, I should have left, but I needed answers. An attempt to shoulder barge the door open resulted in nothing but a dull pain that radiated all the way down to my wrist. But there were rocks nearby in someone else's garden, and I threw one at the window. It didn't break straight away, but I threw another, and then removed my jacket and broke away enough of the shards that I could climb inside. The house barely looked lived in. There was furniture, but no photos. no ornaments, no TV. There was nothing beyond the bare essentials in various muted tones, until I reached the study, and there on a cheap pine desk lay a diary. I didn't remember writing a diary before today, but as soon as I saw the bright aqua notebook adorned with its mini stickers, I knew it was mine from childhood. It was only a small book and yet was still barely 2/3 full, so perhaps I'd forgotten about writing in it because I hadn't kept a diary for very long. The only other thing on the desk was a red bureau, and I flicked through the first few pages until I saw a phrase that had been underlined in red and then checked off with a large, passionate swoosh. It was an entry in which I had mentioned wanting a bar of chocolate that my stalker had ended up sending to me. A few pages later, there was more red ink, this time marking my displeasure at being too ill to go to another kid's party at the bowling alley. I flicked through a few more pages and found a jealous whine about how I wanted hair, just like Stacy's. The vague memory that I had of the child I'd written about had the same color of hair that I'd been sent with pieces of her stuck to it. The next entry that had been marked made no sense at first. A rant about how I wished that mean girl in my class would just shut up. It wasn't someone I'd spoken to in school. With a sense of dread, I wondered what had been done to her. I didn't even have any way to find out. My parents came under fire with an entry saying that I wished that they'd just give me some space. And so he'd created a reason that they'd have to move away for a while. We were nearly at the end of my entries now, and I turned to the last page. The script here was different. It was still my handwriting, but it was rougher, and almost stabbed into the page. I remembered why I'd stopped keeping a diary. A noise outside startled me back into my present, and I left the house from the same window I entered. I've no doubt that someone saw me as I drove away, but it's the least of my issues now. I'm writing this from a cafe. Too scared to go back home, but too stupid to think of any other plan. Because it turns out that the day that I wrote the final entry of my diary was the day that James died. The last sentence I wrote says, "All I want is my brother back." And it's been checked off with one final red swoosh. I've always been afraid of the ocean. It's not crippling. I've been able to ignore it for most of my life. Sometimes it's mentioned when phobias come up in conversation, or when a beach visit is suggested by a friend or by a partner. I've been lucky enough to grow up in a landlocked county, far from the coastline. I don't have the experience of an arachnophobe faced by a many-legged monster, frozen and sweating with terror. It's more that proximity to the ocean causes a kind of unease, a feeling that something is wrong, rooted just below my ribs like a pit. It makes me a little jumpy, on edge. Approaching the surf fills me with heavy foreboding, as if to step into the water would be the very end of me. Wrapped around it is the tiniest feeling that something is missing, that to enter the water, to let the waves wrap around me and drag me down with green hands, is the only way I could ever really be whole. The combination of these feelings has been the root of much confusion in my life, the contradiction of the whole thing. My parents were silently resigned to my strange behavior around the sea as a child. We never had a lot of money, and holidays to the beach were not a regular occurrence. Maybe 2 days spent at the coastline over the summer. My siblings as happy in the sandy water as the tiny skittering crabs, while I stayed back with my mother. It was on one of these holidays, when I was 15 years old, that she gave me my first warning. You feel it, don't you? She asked me this with a look in her eyes which I have never seen before. Something between sadness and fear. It was not the kind of expression you ever want to see from your mother, and it worried me. What? You can feel the sea talking to you. I looked out across the ocean. The round, dark head of a seal is visible in the distance, gulls swooping above it. She looked out too, but her gaze was directed towards my father and brothers, splashing in the shallows. My sister felt it too. That's how I know. You have the same look on your face when you are near the water as she always had. She turned to me, taking my shoulders in her hands and facing me towards her. Whatever you do, don't go to the water. I can't lose someone else. At the time, I was confused and a little annoyed at her lack of an explanation. Eventually, I forgot, let it fade away, as memories of childhood tend to do. I never knew my aunt, as she died before I was born. After my recount of the conversation with my mother, you may expect to hear that she drowned. However, she was simply ill. I was never told the exact form of sickness, but I know that she was wasted away slowly, fading into death. I think the loss of her older sister fundamentally changed my mother. My father has told us stories of how she was when they first met, when she was happy and vibrant and overflowing with life. By the time I, the third child, was born, she was little but the shell of a mother to us. She acted as a mother should, comforted us, fed us, taught us what we needed to know to live. But if you looked, really looked, then you could tell there was nothing there. Hollow eyes behind a bright smile. When I was younger, and had not known loss, I didn't understand. Now I have a certain sympathy for her. This emptiness slowly drove my siblings away. By the time of her death, several years after my father's, I had become a live-in caregiver for her. As such, I was left to deal with her house and affairs. It's a strange thing, the loss of a parent. You can never be ready for it. And just when you feel as if you want to do is cry, you're struck with all these terrible responsibilities which now rest on your shoulders. Breaking the news, organizing a funeral, dealing with decades of possessions. A life well lived now broken down into boxes of books and childhood toys, and clothes and scraps of paper, jewelry and ornaments, and 100 tiny things which I can never know the sentimentality behind. Things which meant the world to her, now sorted into neat piles to sell or throw away or pass on to others. There's a callousness to it, rummaging through the trappings of her life and searching for value. Something so inherently emotional, broken down to methodology. As in most houses, the attic was filled with dusty boxes. One of these, when I pulled it down, was labeled with my aunt's name, the first physical proof I had ever seen of her existence. The box was heavy and cumbersome, sliding from my fingers, the cardboard misshapen with age and slick with a thick and sticky layer of dust. The item which fell from the box appeared to be a fur coat. It was slippery, almost like silk, warm to the touch and much finer than any fur I had ever seen. The pattern was unfamiliar to me, a mottled gray with blooms of silver spreading across it like lichen on a dead branch. The coat stank of old salt and seaweed, like a tide pool on a hot day. With some trepidation, I realized it must be sealskin. I'd never seen a sealskin coat before. Briefly, I wondered whether the possession of it was even legal. Why had my mother kept this? Out of everything, why this? She must have gone through her own process, her own methodology, when her beloved sister passed away. And out of everything, she chose to keep this sealskin coat. And not only keep, but lock away. The dust was unmarked, clearly undisturbed for many decades. This coat had not been worn, had not been displayed, had not been cared for even, as if she did not truly want it, but could not bring herself to get rid of it. As I ran the fur between my fingers, a scrap of letter paper fell from the folds. Recognizing my mother's neat, sharp handwriting, I picked it up. Dearest Maud, my aunt's name. Was this letter written before or after she died? I carried on reading. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was so afraid of losing you that I let myself do something terrible, unforgivable, awful. You should never have told me your secret. You should have known that I wouldn't believe you. I'm sorry I had you involuntarily committed. I'm sorry they didn't lock you up for longer. I'm sorry I stole your coat. If I hadn't, maybe you would still be here. How was I to know? Who would have ever known? Who would have believed you? I did as any sane person would, Maud. Why didn't you keep it to yourself? I thought you were in withdrawal. I wasn't to know it would kill you. Salt water ran through your veins, Maud, and I didn't believe you when you told me. I was going to lose you either way. To this, or to the draw of the endless ocean. I regret my hand in it, but I do believe it was for the best. I may never be forgiven in the eyes of God or in my own, but I did what I did for the sake of my children. What if they were like you? What if you made them like you? I can't let it happen. No child of mine will be marked like you were. No child of mine will be such a cursed creature. I know you told me it was a blessing, but such a thing is unnatural. Who were you to change the ways of the world, the order of things? To change forms like you did is nothing short of the devil's work. I tried to fix you. Really, I did. And when I couldn't do it, I tried to have the professional do it instead. But you really were of sound mind, weren't you? That makes it worse, you know. You knew exactly what you were doing and how wrong it was. But you turned your back on everything, right and holy and true, and you put all your faith in that coat. I hope you are happier where you are. I hope you are healthier. I hope that you have been forgiven for what you've done, as I pray that I will too, when my time comes. All my love always. The paper fell from my fingers. It was nonsensical, clearly. The ravings of a woman stricken by grief. Did my mother truly believe that she had killed her sister by taking this coat from her? Such a thing was absurd. But as my eyes fell back upon the coat, it appeared to shine in the dim light. Despite the state of the box it had been in, it was unmarked, as clean and new as if it had only just come into existence. The conversation I had with my mother on the beach so many years ago suddenly returned to my mind. My sister felt it too. The coat looked to be my size. The overwhelming urge to try it on crashed over me like a wave of unresisting shore, but I could feel in my bones that this was not the place for such a thing. I drove 3 hours to get to the ocean. The journey is a haze to me. The road's empty at that time of night. Bare feet on the sand, I slipped the coat over my shoulders. When I awoke again, it was morning. I remembered little of the night before, but my hair was thick with salt, and my heart light with a sense of freedom. Flashes of memories danced through my head, swimming in the clear water, longer and faster than any human could, rolling and playing with the seals, who welcomed me as one of their own, feeling more at home than I had ever felt before. I see now why my mother was so afraid of losing her sister, and of her children taking the same path. If they were to learn about it, now that I have felt that freedom, I'm not sure that I can go back. One night, I picked up the last of my life in a U-Haul and headed south. At 27, I'd burned out in the city and figured a change of pace and scenery was exactly what I needed. I landed a night shift job at Montauk Port, right outside of New Orleans. The port sat practically on the edge of the Montauk Swamp, a place I'd only ever heard described in hushed tones. I found a small, single-story house a few miles from the port. It was cheap, slightly raised on blocks against the inevitable flood, and backed up right against the thick, black line of cypress and moss that was the swamp. When I first moved in, the air was so heavy and humid, it felt like breathing soup. and the silence at night was profound, broken only by the buzzing of insects and the occasional croaking of a giant bullfrog. The job was stacking crates, logging inventory, and generally babysitting $1 million of cargo. It was monotonous and lonely, until I met Larry. Larry was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, lean, perpetually smelling faintly of tobacco and swamp water, and the only other person crazy enough to take the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift with me in my section. He was quiet, but friendly. A few weeks in, sitting on a couple of overturned oil drums, during our break, I cracked a joke about the spooky atmosphere. Larry didn't laugh. "You won't be laughing long, Mikey," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "You're working on the edge of the Monchok now. That swamp, it ain't just water and trees." Larry gave me the first real warning. He spoke about the swamp folk, a mix of shadow people, restless spirits, and the truly dangerous, vengeful voodoo priests whose rituals and sacrifices had cursed this land for generations. He told me about the bad things that happened deep in the muck, voodoo rituals for powers, offerings to dark spirits, and the kind of violence that lingers long after the blood is gone. He'd only ever look at the ground when he talked about it, like saying the words out loud was an invitation. Not long after that talk, the paranormal experiences started. I was sitting in my backyard one warm, pitch-black night, trying to decompress after work. That's when I heard it. A low, clear whistle coming from the edge of the swamp line. It wasn't the wind. It sounded almost human, but too musical, too inviting. It made the hair on my arms stand up. Another time, I heard children laughing, a chorus of tiny, joyful sounds that felt horribly out of place. Monchok is no place for kids, and the sounds seemed to swirl just beyond my sight, fading into the moss and muck. I'd also hear weeping, a faint, mournful sound, like a woman crying into her hands, always coming from the deep cover of the trees. The lights were the worst. Weird light orbs, sometimes blue, sometimes a sickly green, would float right above the swamp water like eerie lanterns. They weren't fireflies, and they didn't move like anything natural. They were just there, watching. At work, the port felt like a stage for an audience I couldn't see. I'd be alone in the inventory section, and I'd clearly hear voices, muffled and indistinct, whispering my name or speaking in some strange, guttural language. Then came the random footsteps, heavy boots on the concrete that would stop just behind me. I'd whirl around, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, but there was never anyone there. That's when I started seeing him, the Hat Man. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow taller and darker than any man, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned brimmed hat. He wasn't solid, just a void that moved, and every time I turned to face him, he'd be gone. I told Larry about it. Everything. The whistles, the laughs, the Hat Man. He'd just grunt, stare out at the swamp, and mutter something like, "Didn't I tell you, Mikey? Leave well enough alone." He never wanted to talk about it, and his silence was more unnerving than anything I'd seen. The tension was building, a coil winding tighter around my chest. One night, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the silence of the swamp, a sound of pure terror and pain, before it was suddenly, sickeningly cut off. I didn't sleep for 2 days. I was standing on my back porch around 1 a.m. The air was thick and absolutely still. The whistling started up again from the swamp, closer this time, almost right on my property line. It was the same mesmerizing, chilling tune. My curiosity, against all common sense, was winning. I took a step toward the tall grass. Then my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered, breathing heavy. A woman's voice, rough and urgent, cut through the line. "Don't look. Don't look," she hissed. "Do you hear that whistling? Ignore it. You hear it again? You bolt the door and stuff your ears. He'll think your curiosity is an invitation to him. Now hang up. Hang up." The line went dead. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The whistling stopped instantly, replaced by a low, humming silence that felt infinitely worse. The next day I asked the only house near me if they knew anything. An older couple answered, utterly confused. They told me they had been out of town for a week visiting family. After that, the house became a problem. I'd catch shadows walking across the walls in the corner of my eye. Every time, it was the Hat Man. I knew it. Things started missing, only to show up days later in the most bizarre places: my car keys under a pile of folded laundry, my wallet in the microwave. I'd tell myself it was just exhaustion, the grind of the night shift getting to me. I was tired, always tired. Then came the night that broke me. I was working in the old, cavernous storage section of the port, an area where the lights always flickered and the air was cold. I was logging a new shipment of machinery, utterly alone. Suddenly that feeling of prickling, intense certainty that someone was watching me came on like a sudden fever. In the corner of my eye, I saw it. Larry. He was peeking at me from behind a towering stack of wooden crates. Just the side of his face, his eyes wide open and staring, fixed on me with an unsettling, blank intensity. My heart dropped to my stomach. A wave of ice-cold dread hit me. He looked wrong, his face pale and drawn. I watched, paralyzed, as Larry's head slowly, deliberately pulled back behind the crates. "Oh, what's up, Larry? Thought you went home already," I called out, my voice shaking a little. I walked quickly around the corner of the crates, my flashlight beam cutting a frantic arc. He was gone. The walkway was long and straight. There was no other way out. And then at the far end of the walkway, I saw it. The Hat Man. The tall, dark shadow, its brimmed hat unmistakable, walking swiftly and disappearing behind the very last stack of crates. I stumbled back, hyperventilating, and ran towards the nearest group of workers. "I just saw Larry. He was behind a stack of crates. Did you see him go out?" I asked, breathless. They stopped what they were doing and exchanged confused, worried looks. They looked at each other, then back at me. "Mikey, I don't know what you're talking about." One of them, a big guy named Dan, finally said, his voice hesitant. He swallowed hard. Larry's been dead for a couple of months now." My blood ran cold. "He died in an accident here on the job, under mysterious circumstances," another guy added, looking everywhere but at me. Dan stepped forward, his eyes full of pity. "The job posting you answered? You were hired to replace Larry." A couple of days later, I handed in my 2-week notice. I didn't even stay the 2 weeks. I just packed my bags and left the keys on the counter of that little house. I told my boss I couldn't take it anymore. I always felt like I was being watched and the nights were killing me. But the truth is, I knew the Hat Man had seen me. I knew the ghost of the man I called my friend was just a terrified spirit, and the Hat Man was something worse, something that used the dead to lure the living, and I knew the whistle was for me. I was afraid that the curiosity I'd shown when I reached for that door was the invitation it had been waiting for. I was always a sickly boy. I never really excelled in sports or any kind of physical activity in school, but I always assumed I wasn't built for it. Some kids had speed or strength. I had nosebleeds and dizziness. My father wasn't too happy about that, not because he didn't love me, but because he didn't understand. He grew up in a family where you worked hard, you toughed things out. You didn't complain. When I wheezed halfway through a mile run or came home with bruises I don't remember getting, he'd just stare at me with that tight look around his eyes. Not angry, just confused. I think it scared him that his son was proof that weakness wasn't always a choice. My mother tried to bridge the gap between us. She'd sit beside me on the couch with an ice pack while Dad paced in the kitchen. She'd press her hand to my forehead, brush my hair back and whisper, "He's just worried," like that was enough to make the room stop spinning. They took me to the doctor constantly. I remember the smell of antiseptic better than the smell of our living room. Blood work, scans, allergy tests, everything. I lost track of how many times a nurse wrapped a rubber tourniquet around my arm. They never found a single thing wrong with me. Perfectly healthy, they'd say. While I sat there with purple bruises blooming on my ribs like ink stains. Sometimes Dad would drive us home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. Other times he'd mutter, "There has to be something," as if willing a diagnosis to appear. As I got older, it got worse. The migraines came first, sharp, pulsing flashes behind my eyes that made me feel like someone was tightening a clamp around my skull. I'd curl up in the dark of my bedroom while Mom rubbed slow circles on my back, whispering that it was just stress, or hormones, or growing pains. Then the nosebleeds. They'd start suddenly, dripping onto my shirt or my homework before I even felt the warm trickle. More than once my teachers sent me to the nurse because they thought someone had hit me. Breathing got harder too. Sometimes it felt like the air was too thick or too hot in my lungs. Bright lights made my head pound, so I spent most of my time in dark places. Quiet libraries, the back corner of cafes, empty classrooms after everyone had gone home. Darkness felt kinder, softer. One evening when I was 16, I collapsed in the hallway after standing up too fast. Dad caught me before I hit the ground. I remember his hands shaking as he lowered me onto the couch. He kept saying my name over and over, like he thought I'd slip away if he stopped. For a while after that, things settled into a routine. A painful one, but familiar. I almost forgot what it felt like to be normal. Then a few weeks ago, something changed. It didn't feel like sickness anymore. It felt like heat, like someone had hit a thin fuse just under my skin. It started in my arms, just a faint warmth at first, but last night it flared so suddenly, I thought I'd burn myself on the stove. I looked down and watched a bruise form on my forearm. Not fade in, form. A dark burst under the skin, spreading like spilled ink. I hadn't hit anything. The nosebleeds got worse too. Not constant, just violent. Short, sharp bursts that left metallic-tasting clots in the back of my throat. I had one in the shower yesterday and watched the water turn red around my feet in swirling ribbons. But tonight was different. I woke up choking on the taste of iron. I sat up, wiping at my nose, expecting the usual mess. But when I flipped on the light, the blood on my hands wasn't the normal dark red. It was almost black. Thick, sticky, like oil. And the moment the light hit it, my skin started to burn. Really burn. Like the blood itself was heating up against me. I dropped the tissue and backed into the corner of my room, turning off the light as fast as I could. I'm sitting here now in the dark because it hurts less when the lights are off. My arm is throbbing where the bruise spread earlier, and I swear I can feel the heat moving, slowly climbing up toward my shoulder. I don't know what's happening to me, but something is wrong. Something is happening inside me, and I think it's getting worse. I knew no medical expert would know what was happening, so I turned to weirder sources, not magic websites or anything like that. Just old forums, genealogy threads, odd corners of the internet where people talk about unexplained physical conditions. I reached out to a few so-called experts, and even some older family members who knew more about our history than my parents ever did. I wasn't expecting anything real, but I found something. Apparently, there were a few cases on my mother's side, very old ones, where people had symptoms like mine. Most of the family notes called it a weakness or bad blood. A few old entries mentioned possession or curses, but I figured those were just old-time explanations for illnesses they didn't understand. Then I came across one ancestor in particular. He'd kept a journal, and someone in the family had scanned a few pages years ago. The handwriting was barely legible, but one part stuck out. He described his blood turning dark, burning under his skin, bruising that spread without cause. He wrote that someone had marked him after an argument in a tavern. No details, no proof, just fear written in messy ink. He called it a blood curse, but he never explained how he knew. It could have been superstition, or guilt, or just a drunk man's paranoia. I don't know what to believe. The journal said the blood reacted badly to heat and light. That's the part that keeps replaying in my head, because that's what's happening to me, but it doesn't explain anything else. It doesn't say how it started, or if he survived, or if he found a way to stop it. It just ends, abruptly. What am I supposed to do with that? Apologize on behalf of a man who's been dead for centuries? Track down a stranger he wronged? Perform some ritual from a journal that didn't even bother to list one? I honestly don't know. So I'm hiding in my room. I keep it as cold as I can, and I only go out at night. It lets me hold myself together just long enough to feel like a person for a little while, long enough to remember what normal used to feel like. But even now, even in the dark, even in the cold, I feel like I'm burning from the inside out. And I don't think I have much time left. Roughly 9 years ago, I worked midnights at a distribution center in my town. Small place, the kind where everyone knows each other's grandparents and who they dated in high school. And since I was little, people always talked about County Road 1, the old highway that used to be the way to the next town before the interstate went in. Now it was just a long stretch of cracked asphalt cutting through woods and low hills, barely used except by hunters and the occasional farmer. Stories followed that road, missing hikers, cars found empty, lights in the trees, a woman screaming that no one could ever find. I used to think people in small towns just needed something to scare themselves with, something to make the dark feel close. That changed November 4th, 2016. It had rained for days straight. Not normal rain either. Heavy sheets, roads washed out, people stranded. Town felt like it was shrinking in on itself. That night around 3 in the morning we got off early. Everyone tired, everyone wanting to go home and sleep to the sound of the storm. I got in my car and my GPS immediately rerouted me, said my usual way was flooded out. I didn't think much about it until I saw where it was sending me. County Road 1. The second my tires touched the asphalt, it stopped raining. Not died down, just stopped. The wipers dragged across a bone-dry windshield. The sudden silence was sharp enough that I turned up the radio just to hear anything at all. The road looked wrong. Too dark. The trees too close on both sides, leaning inward like they were trying to see who had come. 2 minutes in, there was a stop sign, just there on the side of the road, but there was no intersection. Nothing but trees and ditch and shadow. I laughed under my breath, but something cold slid down my back. I kept driving. Another sign a minute later. Turn around. Same shape, same reflective glare. Just those words. I told myself it was a prank, someone messing around. Someone had to have put those signs there. A couple more minutes of driving, my headlights picked up something ahead. A red pickup pulled onto the shoulder, driver door hanging wide open, hazards blinking slow and tired, engine running. I pulled in behind it. The air outside felt heavy when I stepped out, like I was stepping inside a photograph instead of real night. I heard rain somewhere, but none fell here. No wind, no insects, no sound except distant, rushing water that didn't seem to come from anywhere. I approached the truck. The cab light was on. The floor was muddy. The driver's seat was drenched, like someone soaking wet had just been sitting there. A photo was wedged by the speedometer. I leaned closer to see it, but before I could see who or what it was, the radio clicked. "Look behind you." The voice sounded like rocks against wet wood. I froze. Every hair on my arm stood up. My heartbeat felt slow and loud. I didn't want to turn. I tried not to, but my body turned anyway. She was standing between me and my car. My ex, Jess. She had died in a car accident years before. Now she stood there slouched, hair matted with mud, dress stuck to her skin like it had grown there. Her skin looked water-swollen. Her eyes were white. Half of her jaw hung off of her head, blood dripping onto the asphalt. "Jess?" I whispered. Her legs twisted around first, then her torso, then her head, like something was pulling her in pieces. Her voice came wet and slow. Why did you let me leave?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Her head shook and she screeched a horrible ear-piercing screech before she lunged at me. I took a step back and threw my forearm up, catching her arms on it. I swung a wild haymaker connecting with her loose jaw, knocking her back. I scrambled for my car and dove inside, slamming the door. I threw my car in drive before her face slammed into my window, blood and mud splashing on it. "You let us leave. You left us." Then she said one more thing that stuck with me ever since. "They didn't die. They're all here." I gritted my teeth and threw my car in reverse, flooring it back. She stood in the middle of the road. I made eye contact before I slammed into drive and floored it, veering towards her. The front of my car jumped up and I heard bones crunching and something drag under my car before the rear end lunged up, and I saw her rolling behind me in my rear view. I floored it. I looked down and saw 110 on the speedometer before I took a breath and relaxed, but my moment of silence was interrupted by my GPS. 102 miles until destination. I tried to ignore it. Then I saw headlights ahead, left side of the road. I dimmed my lights and slammed on my brakes, but they did too. I finally started rolling closer and they did the same. I squinted and leaned closer and saw something I'll never forget. My car. Same make, same model, same scratches, same dent in the bumper, same skeleton keychain dangling from the rear view, same crack in the windshield from the deer last winter. I let my car crawl closer until it was right next to me. I looked over and it was me. Same expression, same shaking hands, same eyes wide with fear, same skeleton ornament hanging from the rearview mirror. I made eye contact with myself. My reflection blinked. Then it smiled. A huge smile. Its face was seemingly splitting. The radio turned on without me touching it. "You're not leaving," my own voice said. "No one leaves. Not them. Not you." My reflection leaned forward, jaw splitting, skin peeling like wet paper. Something pale and smooth pushed forward, breaking my window. I slammed the gas. The tires screamed. The reflection didn't move. It just watched as I shot forward. The road ahead got smaller. The trees bent down towards the ground. I looked back and the car was gone, but I saw something in my peripheral of my right eye. I looked out into the woods and saw a blurry figure running next to my car. I looked down at the speedometer. 85. I slammed the pedal to the floor, but it still ran right next to me. The GPS flickered, and I stared at the screen. 182 miles to go. 243 miles to go. Home. I looked back out to my right, and the figure was gone. Slam. Something slammed into the roof of my car, and a dark, bony, muddy arm smashed my window. Grabbing the wheel, I flailed my fist into it, but it wouldn't budge. It moved the wheel side to side, fishtailing my car. The radio popped on. You can't leave. You can't. No one ever leaves. I slammed on the brakes and saw something incomprehensible fly off my car and onto the road. A lanky, skeletal creature caked in river mud. Its limbs too long. Its skin painted in white clay patterns and handprint symbols. Wearing a skirt woven from reeds, sinew, animal hide and feathers. Beads and carved river stones rattling along its wrists. 3 skulls hung as masks layered over its own head, lashed together with braided wet cord, their empty sockets dripping dark water. A necklace of bones and bird talons hung across its chest, clattering as it breathed. Its ribs showed through its skin like cage bars, and its fingers were sharpened to points like carved river rock. I floored it once again, and ran it over before closing my eyes and blindly driving. Then suddenly I heard it. Rain. I opened my eyes and I was back in my town, at an all-familiar intersection. I drove the rest of the way home in silence. I don't think I blinked once. Once home, I sat in my driveway for what seemed like forever before I got the courage to get out. I pushed the door open quickly and jumped out, running inside and closing my door. The next day I went out and looked at my car. No mud, no dents on the bumpers, no scratches on the roof. The only thing different is my skeleton keychain hanging off my rearview mirror was different. A crude small little figure with 3 skull heads carved from muddy wood. I threw it away and sold my car. Don't ever take County Road 1. You may not be as lucky as me.